In today's video, we're going to be talking about tiny homes. Are tiny homes the way to go? Let me know what you think in this video. My name is Ramon Lomeli. I'm a local realtor and the team leader of the Smart Move Group brokered by eXp Realty here in Winston Salem, but we've got connections all over the Triad. For the last couple years, I think tiny homes have been gaining popularity, and so I get asked pretty frequently, pretty often about tiny homes and things of that nature. So I decided, hey, why don't I just make a video about it? That way it's a little bit searchable and you can find more information about it online. People are drawn to tiny homes because they're obviously more affordable and they're more flexible living options compared to a traditional house. A question I get asked a bunch pretty often is, how much does a tiny home cost? And of course, like many things, unfortunately, in real estate, there is no simple answer because there are so many variables, and that's kind of what we're going to explore today. First, we're going to talk about some of the factors that affect cost. The first and probably the biggest is going to be the size of the tiny home. Now, naturally, tiny home implies that it's small, but you'd be surprised. Tiny homes can range anywhere from like literally 90 square feet, which I don't even know how that's possible. Most are probably in the 400 to 600 range, but sometimes they go up to as much as 700 square feet. Now, in North Carolina, tiny homes are permitted. However, you may want to check with your local deed restrictions as well as your HOA if there is one to make sure that you are able. Don't just go out and buy one and put it on a piece of land. So do some research and I can help you with that. Another thing that factors into the cost of a tiny home is going to be what kind of foundation it is. Most people are going to want to put a tiny home on a permanent foundation, so you could do a traditional slab, piers, cinder blocks, or pilings, and all of those are considered to be permanent foundations. Another huge factor in determining the cost of your potential future tiny home is going to be the material that it's made out of, and obviously the interior, what kind of finishes you're going to be finishing it with. Also, land becomes a big variable. Obviously, if you own the land that the tiny home is going to go on, it's going to be much more affordable. But if you need to buy land, in my experience, people that are looking for tiny homes, they're not usually looking for a quarter acre in a neighborhood. They're looking for, on the side of a mountain next to a lake, river with 37 acres or something like that. They're going down on the housing costs, but they want more land, more seclusion. So to wrap up the cost, a tiny home can be very affordable, but also it can be just as expensive as a traditional home. So it really is all about what you make of it. If you own the land, how big you want it, who's going to build it. Boxable is a big company that's doing tiny homes now. I've done a lot of research on them. It seems like a pretty easy process to get some land, make sure you can get water and sewer out there of some kind, septic tank or city utilities, and plant a boxable out there with a permanent foundation. If you're really lucky and you maybe own a piece of land and all you got to worry about is utilities and maybe an affordable tiny home, you're probably looking at $80,000 to $120,000, somewhere in that range. So let me know if that's what you had in mind. Now let's talk about why people love tiny homes. Obviously, a big factor is going to be the cost. Not only the upfront cost, but also obviously if you're taking care of a smaller home, you're heating less square footage, you're cooling less square footage, you're cleaning, and so therefore all the expenses that come with the home shrink down in size as well. The flexibility in location, depending on what you do with a tiny home, as long as it's not a permanent foundation, they can technically be mobile, so you can pick it up and put it somewhere else. So the flexibility of like, hey, I didn't like this area, let's move it somewhere else, that's pretty huge. Simplified living, a lot of people are looking for that because living in a tiny home kind of forces you to have like a minimalist lifestyle, and therefore you're going to be focusing on more of experiences than material possessions. Eco-friendly, that's another big factor. Because they cost less energy to heat and cool, you're typically going to be doing better things for the environment. They can reduce a person's carbon footprint by up to 70%. And of course, financial freedom, which is kind of ties into the whole cost thing. If you have less bills to worry about, you can live a much more relaxed life and your monthly expenses go down significantly. Now let's talk about some common problems that you'll probably run into if you're thinking about buying or building a tiny home, so that you're not blindsided when it comes to this. Obviously, the first one, it's kind of obvious, but we run into sometimes the size of the tiny home can be a challenge because obviously if you have a couple or a single person, not a big deal, but if you have even a big dog or a person or two, or you become expecting a family member to come in, it's going to be, you're going to run out of space pretty quickly. With less space, you obviously have less storage space, if any at all. A lot of these tiny homes have very little storage space, so you might end up having to get a shed or renting a storage building, and at that point, why not just get a house, right? So really think about that. Feelings of confinement, so you might get a little claustrophobic. Of course, in a tiny home, you probably want to go outside and stretch your legs out and take a big deep breath, right? But if you're claustrophobic and you're sleeping like on the upper level that's like 3 foot tall or 3 foot of space there for you to lay there, and you got the kitchen underneath you, it's gonna feel claustrophobic. If you're not used to that, or if you're, like I said, claustrophobic, then you may want to rethink having a tiny home. And of course, we're going to keep going with this video, guys. Before I do that, though, I do want to remind you that if you want to have a consultation with me free of charge, phone, Zoom, email, text, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'll work with whatever works for you. You can always reach out to me. The number on the screen is my cell phone number. Personal cell phone number goes to no one else but me. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because not only does it help the channel grow and it helps other people find the videos, but it also makes me feel good. So if you want to see me smiling, make sure you hit that like button and leave me a comment and subscribe. I'm going to leave you some links in the about section of this video so you can follow me on my social media platforms. Why, you might ask? Well, everyone needs a friend. But other than that, you can also see kind of a day in the life of living in the Winston Salem area. I go to local restaurants, I do local things, I show you, like, you know, what it's really like living here. So if you want to follow me on the TikTok, the Instagram, the Facebook, you can. You'll see a lot more content there as well, more short form content. Sorry for the plug, let's get back to the video. Another issue people run into is zoning and regulations, local ordinances, county rules. So just make sure that you're very aware, and obviously this is where I come in. I can definitely help you out with that, because you wouldn't believe how much land there's very little land out there that's truly what we would call unrestricted, right? There's always someone saying that what you can or can't do. Now, obviously, an HOA is the biggest one. They're definitely not going to let you have a tiny home if it's in an HOA. However, even if you're out kind of in a more rural area, there may be deed restrictions. So buying a larger parcel of land that's not developed, there's no other neighbor, there's no homes in there already, that's going to be probably one of your closer to your best bets, because there's really very few people that can actually say what you can and can't do, other than the county, of course, because we still got to check with county regulations to make sure that the zoning is okay for a tiny home. So yeah, don't think just because you're surrounded by cows that you are 100% able to put a tiny home. Sometimes they don't even let double wides or single wides there. And the biggest obstacle or hurdle that people typically run into when they're thinking about buying a tiny home is going to be for sure financing. Hopefully you're watching this video and you're like, you know what, I got cash, I'm just going to call Ramon, he's going to help me get a tiny home, and that's going to be no problem at all. But if you're going to be financing, there are some things that you need to know. More often than not, what I see is that people are going to have to get RV loans or personal loans, which typically have a higher interest rate and require a higher down payment in order to be able to finance a tiny home, unfortunately. Now, that being said, if you plan on paying it off rather quickly, hopefully it doesn't hurt you too bad, but if you're going to be trying to make that a 10, 15 year loan or something, then it's definitely going to hurt your pockets quite a bit. Although sometimes traditional owner-occupant home loans are going to be available, but it definitely has to be a tiny home on a permanent foundation. And of course, if you're involving a permanent foundation, then the cost is going up, and if the cost is going up, then is it really that affordable? Then now you're comparing back to a regular single family home versus a tiny home, and so there's a lot of pros and cons to weigh out there. I've never actually seen this, but I've heard that you can actually do a construction of permanent loan on a tiny home. From what I understand, that's only certain areas, and it really depends on whether or not there are comparables, and kind of like what are those other ones that people are building right now, the barndominiums, the barndos. Though they're really hard to finance because there's just not a lot of them. So appraisers don't have anything compared to, so banks are like, how am I gonna give a loan to someone that wants a barndominium or a tiny home if there's nothing to compare it to? I don't know what it's worth. Also, securing insurance can be a big ordeal. It's more of a specialized insurance product for a tiny home. A lot of times I see it falling under the mobile home, modular home plan, as opposed to a single family home. Sometimes it even lands under specialty insurance, like I mentioned before, or even RV insurance. And obviously all those determining factors, you're gonna have to talk to a professional, because there's a lot of determining factors. Is it on permanent foundation? Could you move it? There's a lot of other factors. The value of it. Is the land worth more than the house? There's just a lot that goes into it. So make sure that you talk to an insurance professional. Obviously, if it's not your primary residence, if it's just a vacation home, which a lot of people looking for tiny homes are actually considering that as a vacation home or a second home, well, then that means your insurance is going to be higher. If it's in a flood zone, there's a lot goes into it. But I think by far the biggest thing that you got to worry about if you're thinking about buying a tiny home, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe not by far the biggest thing you got to worry about. But one huge thing to consider is the resale value, because for the same reason that banks have a hard time lending to these, barndominiums and tiny homes, is that there's no comparable. So it's worth what anybody's willing to pay, but will the bank finance it, right? That's the biggest thing. Now, it seems to be very popular right now. I've seen some sales recently, which people still made a profit on. However, you can't guarantee it. And being such a niche product that you know, it may be one of those things where you're not going to get your monies in return. You may not get your money back when you go to sell the property, I should say, and so you have to be okay with that. So basically, what I'm saying is only buy a tiny home if you're okay with breaking even or potentially losing money on the sale of the house. Of course, if you have any more questions about this or want to go more into detail, jump on the phone with me, give me a call or shoot me a text. My number should be on the screen here. And as per usual, ignore my competitors' videos, but go to my page and watch some more videos. I'm just messing with you guys. See you guys in the next video.